So the Knob Award for somebody not listening so that they can implement a pay your GP policy even when presented with the truth that the Tories are running down the NHS in order to achieve that goal goes to Tory MP Sajid Javid.
I've worked as an emergency nurse for over 30 years.
This is the type of call-in that stirs something inside. I can feel the rage boiling, the injustice and more. We have a nurse calling in to talk to Sajid Javid, so let's listen to what she has to say.
I'm now left disabled by long COVID because, you know, while we were busy on the front line, putting our lives on the line, and by the way, I lost 3 friends who
sorry
died
to hear that. Very
trying
sorry
to
to
save people. But your government was busy doling out PPE contracts to all their mates, most of whom didn't produce a single piece of PPE, some of whom PPE that was produced is now costing us millions to burn.
So I don't want to keep interrupting this, but I just need to add that it was well known there was a fast track for Tory mates, people who literally set up companies weeks before applying to acquire and distribute PPE. Tory peer Michelle Mone, for example, or Matt Hancock's mate, who was a pub landlord. Meanwhile, we have plenty of reports of companies in this country who've been producing PPE for years, offering their services, but then being ignored.
You have deliberately set about to defund and destroy the NHS from the moment you took office in government.
Well, Karen, let me first...
Prior to you taking government, working in A&E, we hit the 4-hour deadlines. We had the lowest waiting lists in history. We had the highest patient satisfaction, and then you guys came in and dismantled it and saw an opportunity for each and every one of you, for you to make money out of it and for you to get your friends richer out of it off the back of the people who are working on almost minimum wage. We've got doctors on £14 an hour, nurses that were starting on £12, £13 an hour.
So this nurse's account is not only heartfelt, but also hits the Tories where it hurts. It's true. They talk about record funding for the NHS, but somehow they've overseen standards and waiting lists getting worse, meaning they've done an appalling job managing the NHS.
And for what?
Karen, let me thank you. I've heard you loud and clear. Thanks for sharing those views. First of all, let me say that I want to thank you for your service, and I'm sorry to hear about your 3 friends during the pandemic. But you know, when it comes to the NHS, I'm not sure if you heard everything I said earlier, but spending on the NHS, even long before the pandemic, is at the highest levels ever in real terms, in cash terms, no matter how you want to measure it.
In reality, we know that record funding doesn't mean the money is going directly into serving us, the patients. But as with the PPE debacle, the money is going to private companies working within the NHS.
We spend more than most other comparable countries on healthcare in this country. Yet I think most people would agree we're not getting the kind of outcomes that we'd want to see. And you mentioned the issue about PPE, and I get that.
Here's where I begin to feel a tension in my gut. I want to shout at Javid for his phony bullshit that he's coming out with.
What you're saying, but I can't agree with everything you've said about that, because I think you have to think back to the start of this pandemic when PPE was absolutely necessary. Every country in the world had a shortage of PPE, and I think people would have expected their government at the time to do everything they can to get their hands on it.
As I said, there were PPE companies in this country who were offering their services, but instead the Tories were offering those contracts to their mates. Javid is gaslighting us here, and it's not working on me.
And you're right, they may well have brought too much, and you may well have to destroy that now, but I'd rather have a government that's buying too much than having too little.
It wasn't a case of too much, it was a case of it being inferior, because the mates that they'd let acquire it didn't know what they were doing, and they were trying to make a profit by getting it on the cheap.
I don't think you're listening to me, Sajid. The stuff that you were providing was plastic, useless rubbish, gloves that you would put your hands through, aprons that were the thinnest I've ever seen. The PPE was shocking. It was not fit for purpose for most of the time, and it left us open to vulnerabilities. It's left me disabled, basically housebound now. I've gone from being a busy, working 12-hour shifts in A&E, being out on my bike, going out kayaking, out with my kids, to someone who's now left in my home because your government failed to prepare me, to protect me. And also, you are also refusing to recognise it as an industrial illness, which it is, because I wouldn't have got this if I hadn't have been facing COVID every single day.
You can see the wheels in Javid's head working to not accept the reality of what this nurse has just laid out. Listen to how he moves back to his big ambition to introduce further changes to the NHS, meaning privatisation, and for us paying to see our doctors.
Well, Karen, again, I want to thank you for your service, and I'm sorry for the what you're facing now, what you've set out. But I do think that the NHS's issues go way beyond just the issues around COVID, whether it's PPE and things. I think we have a more of a structural issue that needs to be addressed.
Sajid Javid, you are destroying the NHS to profiteer out of it, which means you're making people suffer so that you can make money, which makes you evil in my book. Click here for Sajid Javid's obsession to privatise the NHS.